Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Today, I have with me Paul Briley. Paul is a really experienced business, commercial, and data leader. He's a key senior member of the Cynozure team, helping our customers to develop and grow. Bags of experience in a whole load of different industries and roles. And Paul, I'm super excited to have you on the show. So thanks for coming along.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. No problem at all. And finally we get to do this. So let's get kicked off with a bit about your background in kind of management, in tech roles, and sort of what that's kind of taught you. So yeah, just a bit about who you are to start with, and we can dig into some of that because I think it forms the basis for a lot of what the thing we're going to talk about around sort of taking that commercial approach to being a data leader.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for referencing the fact you had to chase me to do this. It's I know I kind of shy away from these type of things. It's very odd because anyone who knows me out of work is pretty extrovert, and there's just this mystery as to why I kind of run away from doing podcasts or public speaking. So I should do more of it, and it's good that I'm here. My background. So if I go all the way back to the beginning, I guess it's the accidental kind of stumbling into consulting, into technology. My dad actually was in technology, and I always kind of was quite fascinated with what he did. That was where I kind of got the interest in kind of big machines that Word and kind of generated lots of kind of printouts of data and bits and bytes. And so I was always quite a geek and a nerd. And I think that's just maybe how I ended up in technology consulting. So I'd say the first 5-10 years of my career, I had a real case of imposter syndrome. I worked in some rather big companies as a consultant, and I didn't really know what a consultant was. How could I be a consultant? You know, I didn't know anything. I just knew kind of backpacking and university and not much else. So it took me quite a long time, I think, to find my feet. And I think the area where I really started to feel comfortable was just, okay, shit, I don't know anything, but I know how to solve problems. And I think that's kind of how I started my career is in consulting, just being good with people, being good with kind of listening to what they really needed to achieve. So I didn't necessarily need to know all the technology, but knew enough to be dangerous. And kind of that's how I got started. And that's, I guess if I look back, everything I've done has data as kind of a common thread running through it, or technology. And it does interest me. So after consulting, I moved, I was working in the States. So lived in the States for quite a long time, I think a total of 13 years, and ended up moving client side to Nielsen. And it felt really good at the time because they kind of chased me as well. Like you've been chasing me for this podcast. They wanted to bring me on board. Several kind of attempts. I finally said, right, okay, I'll go client side. You know, a lot of people thought I was selling out by doing that, but for me, it was a really great move. And I got to work at Nielsen in the US with an incredibly bright group of people and learned an incredible amount about an industry that to me was quite new, which was media and advertising. With, as you know, Nielsen at the time were the currency of measurement for that industry, at the heart of that industry. So by the nature of being in the roles that I was, where I was in operational and technology roles initially, I really learned the kind of whole engine room of the business and how a TV rating was created. And I think with that made my transition into more commercial and kind of product development roles a lot more straightforward, because I didn't feel the same way I did maybe 10 years prior as a content-free consultant. I actually felt like I knew something, and that's when I think I really started to become more confident in kind of going out to the market, either building or commercializing data products. And Nielsen's arguably one of, if not the biggest data product company in the world. So now you kind of fast forward to where I am today, and after moving back to the UK, spent several years working with a number of different organizations back in consulting again, which I'm really enjoying. Where I am today, obviously working together with Cynozure, is it's a really good place, and it's a really good fit, because I feel like with a career that's been focused on data product development, it enables me to bring that, but a very commercial perspective to data leadership and consulting data leaders, which is obviously what we do really well.
I think that's one of the really interesting things when we first met, actually, was the the commercial focus you'd had, and I'd like to kind of go back and explore some of that, sort of how it worked, what you did, the roles that you had. So we'll come back to that in a minute. But this kind of, we as an organization, and the way we talk to market and the way we talk to customers is about being, outcome focused with how you sort of build your strategy and how you execute sharply, so that it's aligned to the things that the organization cares about, which tends to be the outcomes. Also, it tends to be the inputs that drive you to the outcomes as well. So both those things are really important. So that this kind of idea that having a basis in sort of a commercial understanding and experience in doing that, we certainly see is like super important for data leaders of today. Certainly ones that are going to add most value to their organizations.
Yeah, I see. And we've talked about this a lot. I mean, we've worked a lot across a lot of pretty significant clients together. We're talking global companies, right, who know what they're doing. They're really good in the industries that they tend to kind of lead, or kind of I wouldn't say monopolize, but we've worked with some really big organizations, and a lot of these data roles are very technology focused, or at least initially, and they're kind of recruiting for a technology role. Sometimes it'll even sit in IT. So, the data leader, the appointed data leader, will sit inside, let's say, under the CTO or the CIO, or even lower down in the organization. And what I'm finding is those who bring a very commercial view to the role, and when I say commercial, I mean that you are thinking purely about problems that you're going to solve. You're thinking about business outcomes that you're trying to deliver for, and you're tuning into that frequency really early. Almost as a mega product leader for the business. Those tend to be the ones that are more successful, because I think every time I see these data transformations or data platform rollouts, the same challenge always faces those rollouts, which is communications, change, and getting the organizations to understand, hey, what are we building here, and why are we building it, and how's this going to apply to my world? In this business, how's this going to solve the problems for me, or how's this going to solve the problems for my clients? So I'd say, data leadership roles for me there's a lot of merit to data leaders who have a strong technical background, strong technical understanding, but it's not the be all end all. And I'd say those I would encourage, data lead the commercial reasoning behind why that role exists, why that organization exists, why that's getting funded.
Let's roll back then a little bit. What's formed that view for you? Because obviously there's some sort of current thinking there, and some current experience that you've got and we've got that are helping to move this data leadership and this data strategy thing forward. But so back in, so I guess Nielsen's quite an important time for you in the work that you did. What was some of the roles that you did there, and how's that sort of shaped your thinking about taking data products to market, whether that's internally or externally?
Well, I think Nielsen was in a very favorable position. I was on the media side of the business, so I can only really talk to that side. I can talk about the other side, but I was really, I spent a lot of time working with large broadcast networks on the media side of the business, and Nielsen was obviously the currency in that space. So they had this kind of luxurious position. They'd earned that position over many, many decades. But I think that at times, would lead to some degree of complacency, because there was always that very kind of comfortable base of revenue, almost a cash cow type kind of outcome for them as a business. But then when it got into delivering products in this kind of new digital world, with all these broadcast networks trying to figure out what that actually meant for their business model, and how this is going to disrupt their business model, and how they're going to have to change, I think that's where Nielsen started to, I think they had a lot of opportunity there to move in that space. And we did all the right things. We had a lot of smart people going out, and investments made in these teams supporting businesses like CBS, ABC, NBC, etc. in the US. And we did the right thing by going out there and really embedding ourselves in those clients to really understand what was going on and their challenges, etc. So the good thing about what Nielsen did is we built products together with the clients. Right. We were very close. So they were part of our product development. life cycle, essentially. And I think that's where, I think the most effective products were built. So in this kind of new age, beyond just kind of TV ratings, as new products started to emerge, such as digital campaign ratings, such as some of the social tracking kind of products, or brand campaign effectiveness, et cetera, we were very kind of, I say, a lot more tuned in to the clients, and we really worked closely with them to understand, okay, what are the commonalities across all of them? We kind of knew already a lot of the common issues that they had, but what are some of the nuances to how they want to operate as a business, or where they're going next? And I think that was a highly effective method, even though I do think at times, and not all of the time, but much of the time, we were quite slow to market. And I think the reason for that is, I won't say it was because we were not agile enough, or that's an easy kind of cliche, right? I think with Nielsen, they're on a pedestal, in a position of authority in the industry. And I think it was hard for them to say, you know what, we're going to get scrappy. We're going to push out kind of early kind of iterations of products, and we're going to develop products in an agile fashion, but it's okay to make mistakes along the way. It didn't feel like that with Nielsen. It felt more about the pursuit of perfection, and that, I think, got in the way of progress in the market. And I think that's where we lost market share to companies like Comscore, who were just faster at getting their product to market. And even though the client knew it's not accurate, we know that it was directionally good enough at the time.
Yeah.
And so when I had a client like Microsoft, so another of my clients was the global Microsoft account, I remember sitting there with the client and talking about the competitor's product and talking about our product. And at the end of the day, they didn't care that our product was going to be more accurate, because at the time they just needed something directional. And that made me think, how can we be a bit more scrappy, a bit more iterative, where we can test, learn, iterate, test, learn, iterate, and move through that cycle. And often, so a lot of the conversations I would have with clients is, we're still waiting. We don't have something to even look at with you. And that was incredibly frustrating. So I've taken a lot of those kind of hard knocks along the way, because that would impact me commercially. That would impact my targets, my team's targets. I don't think I'm alone in sharing that frustration at the time. But I've taken that forward into how we work with chief data officers, data teams, et cetera, in terms of proving value early, getting things out in front of the business early, starting small, kind of thinking big, moving through kind of a journey. And I think that's what I would say to encourage, again, any data leader when they're starting that journey, is think about how you can be really visible, really loud, and kind of showing and telling, to use an agile term, showing and telling what's coming, but also showing and telling kind of the value that the platform can deliver. Even if you're starting with just one data product for one group, and you're giving them a very kind of early iteration of something that you're building, something that's comes from the lab. I really encourage that type of operating model, rather than trying to build, I'd say, perfection, and then bringing the business along with you later. You have to bring them along with you step by step. Does that make sense?
It really does. And there's so, I don't know how many people will kind of think about these, I guess, data agencies that have been around for a while. If you think of sort of dunnhumby's, Nielsen, Comscores, all these sort of organizations, and in every industry, there's a central kind of data organization that's collecting data about what's happening, and they're playing it back to the players in that industry. And I think that's really powerful. But what I'm not sure lots of people necessarily kind of connect dots to is that those organizations are essentially creating products that are based on data, that are giving insight that those organizations that happen to be external organizations can get value from, to help them make better decisions about their business. And there's so much similarity between a data function or an organization who's building data products internally for purely internal benefit, can learn from the way those organizations think about data as a product, and the way of taking those products to market. And if you're just thinking internal, the market is your different departments and divisions and business units around the organization. There's so much that can be learned from treating data in a way that kind of the Nielsen's did, and applying that thinking internally.
Yeah, think of every organization to me as a market. So I think of every organization as a market, and I think of every market as needing a campaign, right? And so if you take that mindset, you bring the business along with you from the beginning. And I think, yeah, everything's a product as well. And I know I bang on about this all the time. Everything is a product. Data platform itself, the nuts and bolts of it, that's a product.
Yeah.
That product needs to be clearly communicated and understood, not only in a technical language, but in a business language. It's like, why are we building it like this? Why are we rolling it out like this? What are the phases? Let's give these phases a name. Let's also be able to define in literally 30 seconds or less what that phase is. To a business, to anybody in the business, whether it be the CEO or somebody in buried away, some analyst buried away in some team in the organization, and yeah, that's the mindset. That's definitely the mindset. I mean, I've, as you know, I've got multiple kind of examples of that happening now, where every organization is slightly different. You have to go into an organization and say, right, what's the landscape here? How do people communicate with each other? How do these groups all interact? What's the value chain of the business? The first thing to understand actually is the value chain of the business. What is the product of the business that we're in here? Yeah. And then what's the product we're trying to build that's going to satisfy and enhance that value chain through data, and an organization becoming more data savvy. I won't say literate, I'll say savvy, and more data centric. So yeah, I think I guess that answers your question about that.
How much, just again in the Nielsen days, because I think this is applicable. How much of what was built, the data products that were built, were pull from your customers saying we need better insight into something, and you would create a product around it, either for that individual customer or for the industry as a whole? And how much of it was you innovating, or coming up with ideas about what you thought would land and thought would be useful for your customers to understand?
So I'm going to give a cop-out answer. It was because it was.
It depends.
Feels to me like no, it's not depends. Yeah. It feels to me like it was half and half. Right. And I hope there's none of this is coming across as Nielsen bashing, because it's not the case at all. I absolutely loved my time there, and I think I worked with some incredible people, inspirational people, and a number of those people were responsible for innovation, and they would literally create things that we never thought were possible. I think a lot of the power of Nielsen was being able to fuse different data, especially from what we call the watch side of the business and the buy side. And I was always a real proponent of any product that had achieved that. It's actually, I found it quite unfortunate when Nielsen kind of split recently back into two. I always felt that they would somehow be stronger together and be able to stand out. But such is life, right? So I think I think Nielsen did a really good job of innovating. Again, sometimes I think a little bit slow to market. But I also think they did a really good job of investing in teams that were dedicated to sectors or dedicated to key clients. And we had some large teams really focused on getting under the covers of these clients and understanding their businesses and inside out, and being that voice of the customer back into the organization. And again, that's another thing I like to implement as a data leader in organizations. And right now we're doing that, where we have a large financial services organization who have some absolutely critical programs that the new cloud data platform that's being implemented needs to support. No exceptions, there's no room for error. And so, we have product owners assigned into those teams, representing the data platform, but also representing those programs back into the data platform as the voice of that customer. And I think that's really important, as well as, again, treating the company that you're in and that you're transforming like a market.
Yeah.
So it kind of comes back to that same point, I guess, which I keep stumbling on.
Yeah, no. I think it's good, and as I say, these are all these lessons, whilst through the lens of an organisation that you have experience in, I think applicable, right? And this sort of 50-50 split between what's being asked for and what the data product team wants to create and wants to try and thinks will be valuable. I actually think that's been in lots of organizations, that's probably much more sort of 90% what's being asked for and 10% what the sort of the central function or a data product team wants to create. So it's interesting how different organizations approach that. Are you purely satisfying the requests, or are you working side by side, or are you taking the lead? I think that's a really sort of interesting balance to get right.
A lot of these programs, as you know, are almost like, okay, I've heard it all before, right? Okay, we need to move to the cloud. That's often a kind of a starting point. Okay, I guess everyone else is doing this, so we need to move to the cloud, and that's kind of what happens. So you get these big technology projects, and they get designed, and there's usually incredibly smart people who come in and architect the solution, and they pick some of the great kind of leading technologies like Snowflake, Databricks, etc., to kind of be key components of how the business users will interact with the platform, and they figure all that stuff out. But what they don't do is say, what's the campaign? What's the campaign that's going to accompany that? Yes. And I would encourage anybody to design that campaign from day one, as important as the data platform itself.
What do you mean by campaign? Let's unpick that. I think I get that, and I know campaigns, I know marketing, I know the kind of things that might uncover it, but through the lens of you're releasing data products internally for say your supply chain function or your finance team or HR or something. What do you mean by campaign?
I mean campaign as in marketing, right? So think about it as marketing. Think of it as sales. Think of it as operating model and change. So these are all the things, again, thinking of the company like it's a market. Marketing means what am I going to talk about? What are we going to tell the business about what's coming? What are we going to tell the business about why it's coming? How are we going to kind of articulate this in a language that they understand? So it's not just some big tech project and written off as it doesn't really affect me. I'm not going to feel that any benefit from this. It's just something that happens behind the curtain over there, and I'm still going to get my reports, my Excel reports or whatever it is that these people use. So marketing is about designing the messaging. Sales is about actually closing the deal, meaning you've got to close early adopters, and you've got to get those early adopters on board, and you've got to kind of identify who those early adopters could be, who will get most benefit or have the most dependence on what it is that you're doing, but also not just the early adopters, but those who are going to have to be responsible for the success of the platform, such as data owners, data stewards, etc., which I'm sure will be covered in many other podcasts about data governance and data management and the importance of clarity of the operating model to support that. So you're kind of designing a sales strategy. You're designing a marketing strategy.
Sort of communication. It's how are we going to communicate? What's coming? What's the thing? What are the benefits? What are the features? Why is it going to add value? And targeted at different individuals, because it might be relevant to some people and just interesting for others. Yeah.
Or you have to change the messaging as well. You have to have different versions of that truth in a way. Meaning you have to talk in their language. So, the way you talk about the platform to finance, for example, who are probably going to have tons of manual reconciliation problems, and they're just sitting there going, it takes me way too long to do what we need to do for this business, and it's an absolute struggle every month, and they're very likely to be looking for cost saves, and they're going to be looking for time saves, whereas you've got other groups like marketing who are actually looking to transform the organization in terms of how they talk to their customers and how they close the loop with their customers, which is a very different problem to a financial department. So you probably come about it in a slightly different way in terms of how you talk about the platform and its capabilities. So you kind of tune into their frequency and you adjust. And that's how you, at the same time, you also sell, and you get those early adopters or, candidates on board for being a part of the journey. And also it's an easier way to get data owners to understand what you're doing, because at the end of the day, the only way to scale a data platform is through kind of the community, and you build that community around the platform.
One of the things you mentioned earlier was this balance of speed to market and the balance of getting something really right versus getting something out there. What sort of experience, or what's your sort of views around that a bit more? So
Yep.
right enough, good quality data, trusted versus getting something to market, because there's that constant tension, isn't there? Is keep working at it, getting it perfect, and then missing the boat.
Yeah.
Or there's getting something to market that's directionally right, as you were saying before. And this is an art, right? This is an art, not a science. So I just interested in your views around how you, either from your experience before or sort of your views on how we strike that balance.
Yeah. So the easy answer is I'm a big proponent of lab to factory, and anyone who works with me knows this. So I'm always going on about it because I think it's a really cool model. So what I mean by lab to factory is, for those who don't know, is when you build a data platform, one of the key responsibilities of that platform is to create a single source of truth, certified data pipelines, and over time you start to ingest, transform, and essentially present the core data of an organization through that platform. That's the purpose of it. And the purpose of that is obviously to de-risk all of the crap that happens in organizations at the moment, where multiple sources of truth and silos get created, etc. So over time, you build that up, and that's kind of the factory. Those are the factory pipelines. What you also do is you spin up labs to enable teams of engineers or analysts, data analysts, to start to experiment with data. Now they can start to experiment with data that's being ingested into the platform, or they can bring their own data, which they love doing. They love exporting CSVs and spreadsheets and then kind of pumping that into their labs. But a lab is generally something that you provision it. It has kind of a time frame tied to it. It has limited kind of access, and there's certain rules around what you can and can't do with it. But it enables teams to innovate, and it enables organizations to innovate at scale. So you're not building all your data products in the center, which just becomes one big bottleneck, which I have seen, 10 years ago. That was pretty much every organization, is they kind of bottleneck the development of data products. But now what we want to push out is to this hub and spoke kind of setup, which I know that many of the listeners will know about, and in terms of what hub and spoke means. But you want to enable that innovation, and you want to enable them to bring their own data or use ingested kind of data and experiment locally, prep, model, present, and work with their local teams, iterate, and just do it in a controlled way. And I think it's a really effective way of scaling up the building of data products in an organization, as long as you set the rules, as long as you give them the technology, as long as the technology works as well.
Sure.
They might build something really cool that solves some really, really fundamental problems for the business. And then there'll be a process, if it's determined that should be what we call centralized or promoted, there'll be a process for that then we can promote that product through the central factory. And generally then the data team will build that through the central pipelines and the central data platform, and then certify that as a data product that anybody in the organization can use. So I think lab to factory is a really effective model. I don't know who came up with it, quite frankly. I think it's really cool, but I encourage any organization I work with to move to that model as soon as possible. So even before a data platform is formally launched, soft launching that platform and opening up that kind of capability to select groups who are dying to kind of get involved and really engage.
I guess it's not just the initial launch of a data platform, but any then product that you build off of from that platform can then go through that same model. And that the sort of the original sort of where that came from is that original question about that balance between perfect and getting to market or getting something out there. So this sounds like it helps with being able to put something in front of somebody. And actually, if through that, if you've done, there's this phrase of minimum viable product, MVP. If you've built your MVP and it's 50% of what it could be, but that ends up being enough, that's awesome. That's really good, right? That's great. We've got something that is good enough to answer the question, make the decision, give people what they need. If it's not quite there, then cool, we can iterate, we can improve, we can develop. But this idea of starting with something, getting it in front of people, either in the lab or the factory environment, but getting it in front of people and then iterating it I think sounds quite a powerful way of doing this.
it would have been, if I think back to 10 years ago when I was at Nielsen, it would have been absolutely huge to have been able to set up a lab for every client, right? Every client team, like working really hard to try and solve problems for, media companies or, digital media kind of companies. I mean, we had so many clients. Imagine the power of that, of being able to innovate locally, because we always
at
had
scale.
Yeah, at scale. Every team had really, I remember I've worked with some really great data analysts and measurement scientists who I know were dying to kind of create more and do more. And we were often held back by the fact that we had to wait. And for something I love to use is that we had this thing called the job jar, and everybody hated it. Everybody hated it because it just was basically the bottleneck. Everything went into this jar and then it had to be prioritized, and the central team would work on 3 out of 10 things and the other 7 would go to the next quarter. You could wait years for something to be built. And I remember people frustrated, so frustrated with that. I would go into Nielsen today. If I was there, I'd be deploying lab and factory. Yeah. And so every team has the capability to build something locally. So I could walk into the CW in New York to my client and say, look, here's what we've done. Does this look right? What do we need to change? Let's iterate on this together. We'll work on this with you. Do you want access? Do you want access to the lab? Yeah. Work on this with us. Get your data analysts engaged with us. We'll build this together. And then you have something to make a business case on, because you can say, we've built this. The client wants to buy it. They're ready to pay. There's the business case, because we've got something that we can show and tell, and we've got a client ready to put money on the table.
And again, that translates really nicely to, central data function in a retailer or in a distribution company who, works closely with the teams that they're, the teams around the business to try something out, collaborate together, build something that's of value to them, not that we think might be valuable, but is genuinely valuable, solves a problem for them. But you don't necessarily know that until you get something in front of somebody and start that conversation of, does this help solve a problem, or does it just create more?
I agree.
Just to kind of start thinking about sort of wrapping up, but the sort of bringing it together, and with the framing that we wanted to kind of talk around was taking this commercial approach to being a data leader. Is there anything else that as a data leader you see as being fundamental to being able to drive success with that commercial mindset?
I wanted to mention something about talent, actually. And I wanted to mention something about demystifying some of these new roles that, like data, in the world of data leadership and in the world of kind of data organizations, product managers, product owners. It's become more apparent to me over time that many types of individual could be that role. Yeah. And it's not some special kind of set of skills that
the role of the product manager.
Yeah, the role of the product manager. You can come from one of a number of backgrounds, and honestly, and I'm not trying to kind of belittle the role, because it's a really important role, but you just have to be really good at delivery, and you've got to be really good at listening, and you've got to have a bit of a good enough technical understanding, I think, so you can tell when someone's pulling the wool over your eyes. You can kind of like communicate on a level with your engineering teams, etc. But also, you just got to be really awesome at dealing with stakeholders. And kind of understanding and listening and trying to solve problems with them, and resolving conflict, de-risking projects. And I feel that those are the key kind of elements of a product manager. And I don't think it's as sometimes I think it's made out to sound a lot more complicated than it is. But if you're good at delivery and you can manage relationships with stakeholders, you could be a business analyst, you could be an engineer, you could be someone from a marketing background, you could be a salesperson, you could be a product manager. It's just, and I think that's really important, because I think when someone comes into an organization as a data leader, look around and see what's there, and you might find some incredible talent that would love to be rebadged or kind of promoted through into these cool roles, right? These new roles. And I'd encourage that. You don't need to source everybody from the outside. It's not like, oh, we need completely new blood here. There are people who really want to move into this new world. Yeah. And I know that completely doesn't relate to the topic we've talked about. It's just something I want to shout out, really.
I think it does, because we've talked about treating data as a product, We've talked
Yeah.
about having a commercial mindset and taking a gem of a product and iterating it. So, and to do those things, you need to be able to manage products, and that's a product management capability. And so I think it connects the dots, and I think you're right in that there's all these kind of like underlying skill sets required to manage data products and build data products, as you sort of articulated. And they're not necessarily secret or special, but not everyone has them, and they do need to be trained. They do need to be, you need to experience them. You need to give it a go. And there are some things that are good practice and frameworks for how you do product management, but the power of bringing those things together, I think, is super important. But also in terms of as a data leader, if you think about your role as building data products, then you are a product manager, product owner in your own right, certainly in part of what you do and how you do it. So I think it's relevant, and it's I know we've talked about this a lot sort of offline, is the kind of how those dots get joined in an organization, whether you call it product management or not, but how that kind of manifests itself in a company will often be largely driven by the data leader and or the culture of the business.
Yeah, it's really end to end. Like I laugh every time someone says, "Oh, can you product manage this?" I'm like, okay, so basically you want everything done, right? Because it's end to end. Because the best product manager is the one who really knows what is going on end to end and can kind of honestly orchestrate that to a successful outcome.
Yeah.
So
Cool. Well, been brilliant talking to you, Paul. As I said, I think the experience you've had across loads of different organizations, but particularly in sort of building commercial data products, I think super relevant. And it's been great to sort of hear a bit about you, your background, your story, and how you apply that in data leadership now. So thank you very much for coming on the show.
Very welcome.
Great. And thanks everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll talk to you again soon.